Hello, dear colleagues, and welcome to our webinar, Applying Expert Knowledge for Nitrosamine Carcinogenicity Assessments. My name is Roustem Saiakhov. I'm president of MultiCASE Incorporated, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to this webinar. So we will cover the few topics here, which will be presented by our scientist, Dr. Krystle Reiss, which is research scientist at MultiCASE, and our chief scientist, Dr. Suman Chakravarti. We will talk about the latest advancement in carcinogenic potency categorization approach, CPCA. We will touch on the general scope and key aspect of expert review. And of course, we will talk about the recent changes in our QSAR Flex nitrosamine suite, which includes introduction of new QSAR Flex nitrization formation module. And before we go into this, let's just quickly review what are the nitrosamines and why we're talking about them at all. Nitrosamines are fairly small organic compounds with chemical structures, which is highlighted on this slide. All of them contain N and O group, and R is usually an alkyl group of different degree of bulkiness. You would say, well, it looks like exotic structure, what do we care? And with metabolic activation, actually, this kind of structure can produce reactive alkylating agents, which in turn capable of modifying DNA bases and obviously causing cancer. The first reports about carcinogenicity of nitrosamines were published around 1956. Since then, around 300 nitrosamines were tested by classical two-year rodent carcinogenicity assay, and 90% of them were carcinogenic, and 10% were not. And the same question appears, well, so, okay, fine, these are carcinogenic. We probably can be in danger on factory floor or somewhere else with heavily chemical industry settings, but why we should care? Because we can be exposed to nitrosamines through tobacco products, through cured meats, through some vegetables, through environmental contamination of water. And to make things even interesting, we actually can be exposed to them through our medication. It was recently shown that up to 40% of common medications and 30% of their impurities are potential precursors for nitrosamines because they contain particular amine moieties and they are capable of forming nitrosamine, nitrosamine drug substance related impurities, or NDSRIs. And these NDSRIs can be formed endogenously the moment when we swallow the pill right in our stomach, or during the manufacturing or packaging and storage, and even in solid state formulation. While your drug is sitting on the shelf, it actually can start forming nitrosamines. And NDSRIs are very different from the small nitrosamines, which I mentioned before. So even if we have carcinogenicity data for 300 small nitrosamines, it not necessarily will help us to approximate the carcinogenicity of NDSRIs. There is a lot of information published about this. My favorite article is by Raphael Nudelman, which is listed here as Nitrosamine Saga. I would highly recommend you to get this paper and read it. It's very informational. But the very first paper which related to QSAR with nitrosamines was actually published 40 years ago by a founder of MultiCASE, Dr. Jules Klopman. And 40 years ago, he used a training set of almost 40 nitrosamines, built QSAR for them, and identified the parameters which would be responsible for activation of nitrosamine and making them carcinogenic, those alpha hydrogens. And he also identified the carboxylic group, which can be located anywhere. And it was 40 years before point and crossing paper. As well, at that time, already it was suggested the mechanism why nitrosamine is getting metabolically activated and why they turn into reactive substructures. Again, that was a paper published 40 years ago. Not many people citing it right now, but maybe they should. And when we're dealing with nitrosamine, with particular NDSRI, we actually need to answer two questions. What is the probability for it to be formed at all? Maybe we don't need to worry about it. And if it is formed, how carcinogenic can it be? So we will try to show you how to answer those questions. And please enjoy our webinar. Thank you.
I'm a research scientist here at MultiCASE, and I've specifically been looking into the nitrosamine problem. So as many of you probably know, nitrosamines can be formed either during the synthesis of APIs as an impurity or during the subsequent degradation of those APIs just over the course of time as it's sitting in the bottle or under other conditions. There are two primary types of amines that can form these concerning nitrosamines. The first of these are secondary amines, which are nitrosated through a fairly straightforward mechanism, that being that nitrite binds to the amine, it kicks off the hydrogen, and then you're left with this potentially problematic nitrosamine. The second kind of amine that can be nitrosated are what are called tertiary amines, and these are the amines that have 3 R groups bonded to them. These amines nitrosate at about 1,000 times slower than their secondary amine counterparts, and this is due to the fact that there is an additional dealkylation step that has to occur before the final nitrosamine can be formed. And this also requires that 2 equivalents of nitrite must react with the amine in order to form the final nitrosamine. And it's because of this that tertiary nitrosamines are generally not considered a risk in pharmaceuticals. But of course, there are always going to be exceptions to this. There are a number of different neighboring groups or even just global functional groups that can affect whether or not each individual amine in a molecule will be nitrosated. For example, we have the 2 fairly similar families of drug molecules, those being penicillin and cephalosporin. So you can see from the structure that these look fairly similar to each other, with the primary difference between the 2 being a 5-member ring in penicillin, which is a 6-member ring with a single double bond in cephalosporin. Both of these groups have 2 amines that have the potential to be nitrosated. One is a secondary amine, which I've shown in red, and the second is a tertiary amine that's shown in blue. However, despite their similarities, these 2 families of drugs actually nitrosate differently, or at least that's what's shown in the literature. So cephalosporin only shows nitrosation at the secondary amine. The general product that's formed I have shown at the bottom here. Whereas penicillin, the product is generally shown to be nitrosated at the tertiary amine, with this amide bond being broken, the nitrosamine forming here, and this carbonyl group then going on to form a carboxylic acid. And it seems that the primary reason for this is the presence of this double bond and the 6-member ring in cephalosporin, where this forms a fairly planar molecule where those electrons are pulled away from the amine, making it less susceptible to a nitrite attack. Whereas in penicillin, you have this more bent configuration where the electrons are most likely still on the amine, which makes it susceptible to electrophilic attack by the nitrate, which then leads to the nitrosation, as was shown before. There are a number of other groups that can also affect nitrosation. These include aniline, which, as shown on the right here, can access a number of different pathways to form a nitrosamine once that initial radical is formed. And there's also gramine, which, despite being a tertiary amine, which I'm showing here, it's able to access an alternative mechanism thanks to this double bond over here. And despite being a tertiary amine, it only requires a single equivalent of nitrite to form a nitrosamine, which in this case is NDMA. So what I have been interested looking at in terms of actually trying to form a statistical model of this nitrosation process. We have a training set of about 150 molecules. The training set size is currently this. Because we are trying to tightly regulate the conditions under which these amines have been tested for nitrosation. Specifically, we're sticking with the NAP test, which tightly controls the pH, temperature, the nitrite to amine ratio, as well as the reaction time that these molecules were tested under. So this makes sure that we're comparing everything apples to apples. The breakdown of the amines is shown in the table on the right, where about half of them had at least one secondary amine and the rest of them had tertiary amines only. And then the training sets were trained as classifiers. And so the cutoff for whether an amine was positive or negative was set to either 0%, meaning an amine was considered positive if any nitrization at all was detected. The cutoff was also set to higher percent yields, where if at least the amine had a 1% yield of nitrization or a 10% yield of nitrization. So you can see a decreasing number of positive results as we crank up that positive cutoff. And so we tested for a number of different potential functional groups that are either known to affect the rate of nitrization in the literature, or were detected by running this test set through CASE Ultra, and what CASE Ultra identified as groups that would potentially cause or would potentially have an effect on nitrization. And so we trained 9 different models on this training set, as well as training across those 3 different positive cutoffs, as I mentioned. Generally, the models currently have about 70% accuracy, and what they're predicting in this case is just whether a molecule as a whole will predict a nitrosamine. And what we're hoping to do in the future is, instead of predicting the whole molecule and detecting whether anywhere in the molecule there could be a nitrosamine, we're going to look at each individual amine and predict which specific sites in a molecule will undergo that nitrization. And then just to finish up, I'm showing a specific example. And let me go back to the previous slide here. Specifically, I'm showing a result from the Gaussian process, which is a type of machine learning model. And so these are 2 molecules that were tested using the Gaussian process machine learning model. And so I'm showing an example of a positive result where this was given an 86% chance of being positive. And you can see that this molecule has 1 secondary amine, and that is where nitrization happens in the literature. It has a nitrization rate of about 8.8%. It doesn't necessarily have any activating groups. It's more just a matter of having a secondary amine and then a lack of any deactivating groups around that secondary amine. And then, as an example of a negative result, we have torsemide. This was given a 28% chance of being positive, so it's negative. And this in literature showed absolutely no detected nitrosamine products. And this is despite the fact that we have 3 secondary amines in the structure, which would make it seem like it should be very liable for nitrization. However, each one of these secondary amines is surrounded by a conjugating group that pulls those electrons, that lone pair, away from the amine, which actually decreases its chance of being attacked by nitrite. And so in this case, these groups include a benzene, a pyridine, and then around the two amines that are in this arm here, you have a sulfonamide group, as well as a carbonyl shared between these 2 amines. And these all serve to pull apart or pull away those lone pairs and prevent nitrite attack, which ends up with us having no detectable nitrosamines produced. And with that, I will hand the presentation over to Suman.
So thank you very much, Krystle, for the nice presentation. You set up a very nice tone and setup for the next presentation, which is from me. And I'm Suman Chakravarti from MultiCASE. I'm the chief scientist there. And I would like to talk about the different software tools that we have developed with an aim to perform a comprehensive risk assessment for nitrosamines. So as Roustem already mentioned, I don't have to talk too much about what nitrosamines are, but just one small thing that I want to add is that these nitrosamines has been classified as cohort of concerns in the ICD-7, and if they're found as impurities in pharmaceuticals, they need to be controlled, at least it was so far, as in acceptable intake limits, which are significantly lower than the acceptable intake limits of other types of regular ICD-7 impurities. So that's something that has to be kept in mind. And those control levels and acceptable limits are extremely low so far. But now, after the CPCA, guidelines, things are changing. Now we have much more higher levels of acceptable limits for many nitrosamines, so which is a very good news. Now, as I said, that I will talk specifically about the software tools in MultiCASE that we have developed as part of the QSAR Flex software. And those software tools that are related to nitrosamines can be roughly classified in two different types. The first one is the software modules that we have developed that predicts or assess the probability of nitrosamine formation. And these tools are we are going to launch in a very short time. And in that category, there are two different types. One is the software tools that can predict the formation of nitrosamines from individual amines. That can be an API, or it could be impurities or degradants, and so on. And the other tools that we recently developed that can predict or assess a full synthesis route of an API and perform evaluation to see what kind of different nitrosamines can form from a full synthesis route. So these are two different types of things that we have developed for assessing the formation of nitrosamines. The second type of software is related to assess the carcinogenic potency of nitrosamines. And there we have, again, two different types. One is the CPCA module, Carcinogenicity, Potency, Categorization Approach module, that we have already using for a year, at least, almost a year, since the launch of CPCA. And there is a very important tool related to perform surrogate search for nitrosamines and analysis, which can be classified as read across techniques. So these are the two different types of tools that we have for nitrosamines. Now, I want to bring your attention to something really important. So these two types of tools are hybrid in nature and they are comprehensive. That means they utilize different types of models underneath. They use both statistical as well as expert rule based methodologies. They use multiple databases underneath. They are very sophisticated in terms of generating reports, and we have designed them in such a way that they can provide all the information in one place, so that while you are performing your evaluation, you don't have to jump from one part to another. So this is a kind of an overview of different types of software tools that we have for nitrosamines. Now let's talk first about how we assess what kind of nitrosamines will form and what are the different types of tools we have. And these tools and these present in the next slides will actually cover these three different aspects or scenarios. The first is identify the identity and properties of the nitrosamines that are going to form from the amines, their likelihood of formation, and finally, the nitrosamine profiling of a full synthesis routes. So these are the topics that I'm going to cover in the upcoming slides. So let's first talk about how nitrosamines are formed. Dr. Krystle Reiss already gave a very nice overview, so I don't have to tell too much, but I just want to mention that they can be formed from secondary or tertiary amines. in the presence of nitrites, and secondary amines usually follow this kind of route, and the tertiary amines are this. But there are a few things that I just want to bring your attention to, and one is that the tertiary amines are significantly less reactive, as Dr. Reiss already said, and the first step in the formation of nitrosamines from tertiary amines involves a slow dealkylation step, which actually forms a secondary amine, which after that it follows the same type of route as the secondary amines. But the secondary amines, their reactivity to form nitrosamine depends on various factors like pK, steric factors around the nitrosamine or amine group, and so on. So all these things will consider while we try to find out what kind of nitrosamines will form and what will be their likelihood. So these two synthetic routes are just the very important ones, but there are many different types of reactions and reaction mechanisms that are involved. Particularly, the tertiary amines are much complex in terms of nitrosation. I just wanted to also mention that there are other types of compounds that can form nitrosamines, like quaternary nitrogen, quaternary amines, or the ureas and amides and so on. Now let's talk about formation of nitrosamines, particularly in pharmaceuticals, which is a special type of compounds. And as I understand that many of us are concerned about pharmaceuticals only. So the possible sources of secondary and tertiary amines are from reagents, reactants, intermediate products, even the API, as Roustem said, the API can form nitrosamines while it is stored in the shelf or being used. Impurities in reagents or in the API can be a source of amines. Even the cross-contamination of equipment from other synthetic processes can be a source of amines. The sources of nitrosating agents can be water, which is used extremely commonly in organic synthesis, the excipients in the dosage forms like the diluents or the volume agents, the quenching agents that are used in organic synthesis to stop the reaction or to use the unused reactants, the packaging materials, say for example nitrocellulose, or the printing inks can be source of nitrosating agents. So these two things are important, the sources of amines and the sources for nitrosating agents. So these things we should keep in mind while we are talking about formation of nitrosamines in pharmaceuticals. So now let's talk about the specific software tool that we have developed to find out the formation of nitrosamines from individual amines. So those individual amines could be the API itself, which can form nitrosamine in the storage, during the storage, or while it is being stored, it can interact with the packaging, even with the air, and can form nitrosamines. So these tools can also predict formation of nitrosamines from reagents, degradants, impurities, and any other substance. So any amine can be used as an input to these tools to form nitrosamine, to find out if it can form nitrosamine and what kind of nitrosamines. It also gives you a very nice hint about what would be the carcinogenic potencies of these nitrosamines that are formed, okay, and their physicochemical properties of these nitrosamines. So all these things will be important when you are trying to perform a comprehensive overview of a risk assessment for nitrosamines in your process. Now, let's take an example. This is a drug, terbinafine, and this is an antifungal drug, as far as I understand. And if we just see its structure, we can see that it has a tertiary amine, but can we guess what kind of nitrosamines will form from it? Being a medicinal chemist, even for after seeing so many amines and working with nitrosamine for so long, it takes some time to find out what nitrosamine will form. So that's why it is important first to find out what nitrosamine might form for such a drug. So just as a fact, these three different nitrosamine can potentially form from terbinafine. Three nitrosamines, and all three are completely different from each other. Okay, so the heart of these nitrosation tools that we have developed actually includes a set of expert rules that can be used to find out what nitrosamine will form and what will be their likelihood. Dr. Reiss already showed you how to use the statistical models to find that sort of probability. Here we are talking about expert rules that already used the knowledge that we have developed or generated from those statistical models. So these expert rules are designed for predicting the likelihood of formation of specific nitrosamines from secondary and tertiary amines. And these rules are based on the steric and electronic factors around the amine centers that can affect the probability or the likelihood of formation of nitrosamines, and the pK values of those amine groups in the API or in the impurities. It gives, when you use it, you'll see that it gives you a score of nitrosation, and that score can vary from a positive score, which is highly likelihood, and to negative scores to even to -8, which is negligible formation. So it gives a kind of a quantitative way to the probability of the nitrosation. But as a friendly manner, it gives you 4 levels of likelihood of formation, like very likely, likely, less likely, or negligible. So if you have an API, and if you use the expert rules, you would be able to guess what is the likelihood of formation of a nitrosamine from it. And these rules are developed using expert analysis. We have used our own expert knowledge, literature study, and discussion with experts in the field, as well as statistical modeling, as Krystle said. So let's take an example of a very simple amine, this diethyl isopropylamine, which is a very common reagent in organic synthesis. And if we use these expert rules, what will be the the nitrosamine that might form from this particular amine? So these will be the 2 possible nitrosamines that can form from this diethyl isopropylamine. The first one is the NDEA, and the second one is the EIPNA. And as you can see, using the expert rules, that tells us that the probability of formation of these 2 nitrosamines from this particular amine is negligible. It might still form, but the likelihood of formation is very, very low. Okay, and so far you will not find any kind of tool that can give you this kind of probability, as far as I have seen. So now let's go back to the terbinafine example. So here are the 3 nitrosamines that might form from this particular API. And now if we apply the expert rules, these are the likelihood of formation. So, except this one, the other 2 are likely to form. So the risk of formation is pretty high for these 2. Even the values are negative, but still -2 and -3 is not very low values. But this one is a little bit less likely to form. But overall, these 3 nitrosamine can form from terbinafine. And these are the deactivating and activating features that we have applied to calculate these scores. So in the case of the first nitrosamine, the tertiary amine group has been used as a deactivating feature. But the second one, there are 2 deactivating features. One is the tertiary amine and the steric hindrance from a larger group that is leaving the amine. So these are the 2 deactivating features. In the case of the last one, there are 2 deactivating feature, but 1 activating feature. So that's why you can see that the nitrosation score is a little bit higher as compared to the other 2. So this is how we apply different types of functional groups around the amine to find out what would be the likelihood of formation of nitrosamines from an amine. Now, just a little fact, all these 3 NDSRIs are actually recognized by regulatory agencies like Health Canada and European Medicine Agency, and they have been listed in their list, that appendix that they publish once in a while and update. All of these 3 has been listed as with the CPCA AI of 18 nanograms per day. So they consider them as very potent. Okay, so let's move on. So now see, this is again, we are going back to the terbinafine, which is the query. Now let's check it out how QSAR Flex software will give an output that you'll be able to see it when you'll use the nitrosation tool, how that would look for terbinafine nitrosation. So this is the screenshot that I just took from QSAR Flex. And as you can see that it's a tabular form, very nicely done. And you can see that it predicts all the 3 nitrosamines from the terbinafine API. And the second column actually gives you the likelihood of formation, and the output, QSAR Flex output, also contains the acceptable intake limits for the API, for the nitrosamine, I'm sorry. But most importantly, it also gives you the physicochemical properties of the nitrosamines. That includes log-P, water solubility, vapor pressure, and boiling point. Why we give them? Because this is in this particular case, this is an API, but you can also use this tool for degradants and impurities. And the log-P values, water solubility, and other physical properties can give you a good amount of confidence to find out what would be the purge scenario for these nitrosamines. So that's why we always calculate log-P and water solubility and other physical properties for the nitrosamines that are formed. Okay, so these are the highlights of this output. The first one is that it gives you an exact mass so that you can use it for identification in the mass spectra if you're using for analyzing the formation or the impurity profiling, and it gives you a nitrosation likelihood. It also gives you carcinogenicity data for each nitrosamine that are formed, CPCA values, and regulatory AI if available. So for example, this first nitrosamine, CPCA calculates its AI to be 18 or 26.5 nanogram, depending on EMA and FDA's setup. And the regulatory AI is already published, and both Health Canada and EMA gives it a 18 nanogram per day limit. So very comprehensive. So this is the first tool. So now let's go to the other side, which is other part of the nitrosamine formation, and that is the profiling, nitrosation profiling of a full synthesis route. So there are a few things that I would like to point out here, that this tool takes the whole synthesis route as the input. It predicts from each step of the synthesis what kind of nitrosamine will form from every reactant, reagent, and product that is present in the synthesis route. It also finds the regulatory AIs and TD50 of nitrosamine if available. It also computes physical properties of each nitrosamine that forms, and it is very helpful in selecting reagents. And if you want to compare 2 synthetic routes and find out which route would give you a lower liability for nitrosamines, you can actually use this tool. So comparing different synthetic routes for risks of nitrosamine, this kind of tool can be very helpful. Okay, now synthesis of terbinafine. Let's go back to the first case study and see what would be the output from QSAR Flex. Let's see the exact software output. And in this particular slide, I'm showing you the evaluation of nitrosamine that are forming from every reaction, reagent, and reactants and products that are present in the synthesis route of terbinafine. So this is the synthesis route that I just used. It's an example synthesis route. It can have, terbinafine can have many other possible synthetic routes, but this one is just one example. And as you can see, that whoever has designed this route made a pretty insane type of synthetic route, because the first reactant is a I can see that it's not a nitrosamine, but it's going to be very bad in terms of carcinogenicity and mutagenicity. It contains both alkyl halide and a epoxide moiety in it. But let's not dwell too much on it because we are talking about nitrosamines. So this particular QSAR Flex output has a couple of parts. The first one shows the synthetic scheme, which lists very nicely what are the reactants, reagents are present, what are the different steps. And so there are 3 steps in it. And the second part shows you breakdown of every reactant, product, and reagents and solvents that has been used in this synthetic route automatically. You don't have to do anything. You just have to input the synthetic route using a SMILES or RxN file. And these little dots that you can see, these are actually showing you how many nitrosamines will form for a particular amine. So this triethylamine that has been used in the step 1 can produce 1 nitrosamine as shown here. Number 5, which is this particular compound, which is another tertiamine, can form 3 nitrosamines. So just by looking at it, you'd be able to tell what reagents, what reactants are forming how many nitrosamines. So this is a very comprehensive profiling of the whole synthetic route. Very user-friendly, and the only input that is required from the user is the reaction scheme. Okay, so now let's check it out, another QSAR Flex output for the same synthetic route. But now we are talking not about the reagents, specific reagents, but how many nitrosamines will form from a specific step. So again, let's go back to the same synthetic route. And now we are analyzing every step. So there are 3 steps, and you can see that how many nitrosamines are forming from individual steps of the synthesis. So the first step produce 4 nitrosamines. So if you just look from the reaction route, it will be very hard to tell how many nitrosamines are forming, but looking at the output, it will become extremely clear. Of course, these are the potential formation. It doesn't mean that it will form for sure, but there is a possibility given a nitrosating agents are present, the pH values are suitable, and so on. Okay, so this synthetic route is not a very good one, as you can see that it will generate a lot of nitrosamines in every step. It's very helpful in terms of comparing different reaction routes if you have them. So these 2 screenshots that I just showed you gives you an idea of how many nitrosamines will form, but it doesn't tell you which nitrosamines will form from which reagent. So QSAR Flex also gives you that. It will take every amine that is present in the reaction route and tell you what particular nitrosamine will form. So for example, the number 5 product which is actually part of step 1 and step 2 in this synthesis, will produce 3 different nitrosamines, as you can see here. And it also tells you what will be the likelihood, what will be CPCA potency of these one, everything. But most importantly, as I'm pointing out here, that these 2 nitrosamines that will form have very high water solubility as indicated by the calculated physical properties, and that those water solubility will give you at least a chance for purging the nitrosamine from the synthetic route. And as you can, if you can see it, it's small letters, but whenever possible, we actually give you the experimental physical properties if available. So for NDEA, we have all the log P values, the water solubility, vapor pressure, and boiling point in experimental data form. So in summary, it's a very comprehensive overview of the synthetic route. It gives you physical properties for estimating purge outlook. It gives you carcinogenicity data, CPCA calculations right at one place, you know. So I don't think that anything is available in this way in the whole industry right now that gives you such a comprehensive outlook. So I just gave you an example of terbinafine. Here is another example where I'm using even more steps. So this is a particular synthetic route for lisinopril, and as you can see that it contains 5 steps in the synthesis, and each step is divided like that. So in the first step, only 1 nitrosamine forms, but on step 3, there is a chance of formation of 4 nitrosamines from these 3 reagents. Okay, you can also add impurities and degradants to the synthetic route if you have that information. Currently, we are not predicting impurities and degradants right in the synthetic process. Maybe in future, I don't know, but you can add them if you want. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit, take an overview of what we just saw. So the important thing is that you can actually use these tools to have a risk assessment, the formation of nitrosamines. And you can actually have an idea of what the risk that might be associated with the particular nitrosamine. So there are a few questions that we can ask using these tools, like how early or late in the synthetic route the nitrosamine forms. How likely is the formation using the expert rule and statistical models? How potent is nitrosamine? And lastly, but not least, how easy or difficult would be its separation based on physical properties? So these are the 4 questions that I thought might be very important if you want to find out the risk associated with a particular nitrosamine in your whole synthetic route. So let's take 2 scenarios, 2 very extreme scenarios. Suppose there is a in your synthetic route a nitrosamine that forms very early in the synthesis and has negligible likelihood of formation, has a low CPCA potency, 1500 nanogram, and have very different physical properties than the desired products. And the other one, where the nitrosamine forms very late in the synthesis and high likelihood of formation, very high potency, 18 nanograms, and highly difficult to separate from the desired products because of the similar physical properties. So which one of them would have low risk? So obviously, the first one would be a low risk nitrosamine as compared to the second one. And this idea you can immediately get if you use the tools that I just showed you. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about the carcinogenicity potency assessment, that tools that we have developed. So first, we found out what is the likelihood of formation and what nitrosamines are forming. Now, if we want to find out what would be their carcinogenic potency, which I already covered a little bit, as you can see that the nitrosamine formation tools also gives you a pretty good idea about their carcinogenic potency. But let's see more specifically to the CPCA tool that we have developed and surrogate search and analysis read across that are part of the tools. This is not important right now because you probably already have seen this slide thousands of times, but the metabolic activation is the main factor that we need to keep in mind when you are trying to find out what is the potency of any nitrosamine. So the QSAR Flex has a CPCA module, which gives you an automated way to find out what would be the CPCA predicted potency. But I just wanted to mention that it has a sophisticated surrogate search and NDSRI search techniques built right inside, which is updated very frequently. Let's go directly into the screenshots from the CPCA module. This is how it looks. This is a NDSRI that we are trying to evaluate, and as you can see that it predicted to be very potent, 18 or 26.5 nanograms. And so this is the CPCA potency category shown here and the AI limit. It also gives you, if available, right in the first part of the report, what is the regulatory AI, if available. So all the three regulatory agencies, FDA, Health Canada, and EMA, has published AI values for this particular NDSRI. And if there is a suitable surrogate available for it, we immediately show it right at the beginning. And in addition, which is the best part of this module, is that it gives you pretty good idea about, absolutely definitive idea about what are the counts of alpha hydrogens, what kind of deactivating features are present. Visually, it shows them what kind of activating features are present, and the CPCA workflow is given right away. So you know how the CPCA values has been calculated. So there is no guesswork involved in this. Everything is very nicely designed. It gives you every information right away. So when I talk about surrogate search, that's also built in the CPCA module. So it gives you the relevant surrogates with carcinogenicity data for the NDSRI, which also calculates the similarity values, and it accounts for the carcinogenicity study robustness for surrogates, and it complements very nicely the CPCA methodology. So this surrogate search can be used for few times when you can actually override the CPCA predicted AI value, and you can find out if there is a higher AI value possible using the surrogates. So all these things are built in. So let's take example of this hypothetical NDSRI. So CPCA calculates the AI value to be 1500 nanogram per day. And let's see if we have a surrogate that can be used to increase the AI value. So yes, we have a surrogate available, which has all the features matching 100% with the features in the NDSRIs around the nitrosamine group. It has robust carcinogenicity data, and the TD50 value is 1.72. So if you use the TD50 value, we can actually go above 1500 nanograms per day, and you can actually give it around 1700 nanograms per day, which is a relief, right? So this is a very nice example that tells you that we have not only the CPCA module available, but also surrogate search built right inside. So I think I'll skip this slide. Let's recap the presentation here. So in summary, I just want to mention that MultiCASE actually provides a very sophisticated set of software tools for risk assessment of nitrosamines, and we have built them in a way and designed them in a way that actually very similar to other types of software that MultiCASE provides, extremely user-friendly and different from other vendors. Different means better in terms of the user-friendliness, the kind of information it provides at a single place. These tools go beyond just finding out what nitrosamines are forming and what is the CPCA prediction, because many people can do that. But the special thing is that it also gives you the formation of likelihood formation. It gives you a tool to perform a very comprehensive profiling of your synthetic route. It performs physical property calculations for the amines and nitrosamines, and the tools has up-to-date database that lists the regulatory acceptable intake limits for every nitrosamine that has been published by the regulatory agencies. It also provides surrogate search and read across techniques. All the tools that we developed are backed by good amount of research work in MultiCASE, all in-house done with good collaboration from outside, and they are very solid software. And we are not only developing these tools, but are continuously improving them by working with you actually, and finding out where our software can be improved even more and how we can actually improve it to add other features in it, and so on. So with that, I thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to present in front of you. Hopefully you enjoyed the presentation.